Hello and welcome to the All About Ability podcast. This podcast is sponsored by KO Financial, specialists in mortgages and protecting your family's finances. Whether you're looking for the best mortgage for you or want to make sure you and your family aren't struggling if you're seriously ill or pass away, call KO Financial on 0141 447 0290 or email advice@ko-financial.co.uk. I will include this information in the show notes. Your story, I thought, was really caught my eye because I've got like 4 brothers, right? And they've always been really supportive of me being in a wheelchair my whole life. So it's like they've always been the backbone of my life, essentially. And I watched you and your brother and the connection you've got. It's really kind of struck me and connected with me in a way that I was like, wow, this guy is really cool. Later on, you messaged me to kind of give me credit for the podcast on that. And I thought, this guy is great. And then you came to the gym when I was doing the challenge thing. So I was like, I want to have a conversation with this guy. So it was great to have you here. And I'd like to hear more about that whole relationship you have with your brother.
Well, it goes back. So my older brother Alexander has got cerebral palsy, he's quadriplegic cerebral palsy. I actually don't even know the full medical extent of the disability or various disabilities he has. We actually have there's a document that exists because my parents had to renew their guardianship of Alexander, which is something I suppose we'll double back on later, but we didn't even know that was something as my parents had to do, because it was just like, no, we're his mum and his dad. And it was my friend who's a social worker said to me, you maybe want to, we were under a bit of pressure at one point, and I kind of reached out to him for a bit of help, like how can we get a bit more support? And he said, well, are your mum and dad legal guardians of him? And what do you mean? We've just looked after him his whole life. So as part of that process, there is a legal document that has, various things written on it, and from a medical perspective and a social work perspective. And I've not read it because I don't think I can. My sister told me she read it. I must point, I've got a younger sister, Lauren, and she said you'll just cry reading it. So my older brother's got cerebral palsy, and Alexander is, I don't even really like using these terms, and it's only something in recent consciousness where I used to say he's severely disabled or profoundly disabled. And I don't really like those terms, but that's how society, that's the polite way of saying it. But I've grown up looking after Alexander, or I'm his brother, but I've grown up almost as a carer alongside that. And Alexander communicates with his eyes. He looks up for yes, he looks down for no, and he can give you a series of clues, and he can understand everything. But he can't even sit himself up in the chair. He has to be strapped into a moulded chair. He needs to be fed, washed, dressed each day. If his leg is sore, we need to stretch it. So I grew up with that as just total normality for me. And of course I'm really close with my brother. He says to me that he hated me for the first 4 or 5 years of my life. Because I didn't do anything for him. I was just probably somebody that took on a sort of deeper level, a Freudian level, I probably took attention away from him. But once I was able to start doing stuff for him, he and I were just, like, I grew up playing Alexander's records, and he's mad into music. He loves music. And when I was about 5, I would be able to get into the bedroom or the spare room, and I would sit with him for hours, and I would play his LPs for him. And that gave my parents a break. And it's just, that's my whole world, and my whole life growing up has been about my brother. So it should, it's something, there are so many nuances and layers and complexities to that as you get older, you realise I'm a bit fucked up because of this or that. Or, I'd be in school and teachers would say to me, oh, do you not get enough attention at home, James? And, looking back, yeah, probably didn't, because I'm an attention seeker and I talk too much, as you found out, I'm telling you, I'm tight for time and I've not stopped talking. You have to talk to my brother, you have to figure out what he's saying. So he's pointing and it's a clue, what are you looking at, right? And he points his heart, and that's for emotions. So is he happy, is he angry, is he sad? He's developed this phrase, sorry, but you want something. So he caveats everything he says by saying, I'm really sorry, but I want something. It's quite, when you think about that. So, and it's not without, you'd walk into the room and sometimes you'll, wrist, that's for your watch, that's time. you trying to tell me about something happened? Is it something happened today, yesterday? No, past, right, when? Last week? Like that. 25 years ago. Fucking hell, you know, and he'll not give up and he'll try and tell you it was something that happened 25 years ago. What is it? And fucking starts looking. He was trying to tell us something about Ferry Aid. There, you know, there used to be the ferry disaster. There was a concert and the band was in. How does he figure these things out? So you've got to go through that whole range of guessing, figuring it out. He's in his wheelchair, fucking pointing at you, and you're saying, Al, I can't get what you're saying. He's fucking looking at me saying, yes, you can. Once you figure it out, you've then got to re-articulate it back to him. So it's like you get all the pieces. Once you've got the fucking jigsaw complete, you've then got to speak it back to Alexander. But we would always put his own persona or our spin on his own persona. So I'd put on a voice, aye, right, James, fuck, I'm trying to tell you this. My sister's really funny. She would go, all right, Ma, I'm just you know, she'd put on like an Eddie voice. And that's how I talk all the time, because when you're sitting with Alexander, and I don't know if you've ever found this as someone who's lived a life in a wheelchair, it's easy to passively ignore him.
Oh, definitely.
So if you just sit, it's nice that you talk, by the way, right, lads? Thanks for coming. When you sit quiet, you're ignoring him. So talking is almost like our sonar. You know the way bats operate with sonar? That's almost, you know, so I don't like silence. I would really struggle with silence. You know, and people are like, oh, can you not be quiet, James? No, I fucking can't. And it's because you've got to talk all the time, Alexander. So that's, I suppose, where it comes from. And yeah, like, my mum, I mean, I should let you ask me some questions, but
feel free.
But the reason growing up, we grew up in Summerson, and my mum says to me, look, we had you so that, you know, your brother would have some company and something. Because my mum used to have to bribe kids in the street to kind of come in and play with my brother. Because when you're a kid, you just want to run about, and there's my brother kind of in this wheelchair and in a buggy in his early days. So my mum made sure Alexander missed out on nothing. And, you know, she would make me, but, you know, my pals would come to the door, and I talk about this in comedy. My pals would come to the door, you coming out to play foot? Aye. My mum would go, take your brother away. And she'd bump him down the wheelchair, and I'd be 8 years old, and I'd be pushing about, as I like to call it, the scheme, make myself sound gangster, but I'd be pushing Alexander about Summerson. You know, my pals would literally jump the fence to get into St. Blaine's to play football, and we'd need to go the long way around. And I'd put me at the side of the pitch, and, you know, that was my life. Just, you know, just normalised it. And my mum, I think, I was listening to your podcast with Amy, Body by Amy, as she likes to be referred to, and I was kind of blown away by it, because she was talking about parents and having that sort of communication difficulty as our parents are deaf. And, you know, how do you cope with these things? You know, so like my dad, both my parents are brilliant. They do so much for Alexander. My dad, I'm getting quite emotional, sorry. This is all repressed.
Sorry.
My dad would probably want my brother not to go anywhere. Not because he doesn't want him to do anything. He doesn't want anyone looking at him. He doesn't want anyone. That's his way of protecting. So my dad's like a control freak, because it'd be like, how are we going to get him there? How are we going to get him in the wheelchair? What about his arms? Whereas my mum, right, mum and dad, Shug and Ethel, right, what are you laughing for? No, right, and my mum will be like that, Shug, well, I'll just figure it out. My mum, so I'm a split, so my mum would just be like, well, we'll just take him. We'll just ask someone to help us carry him, the wheelchair up the stairs. So I get kind of brought up that way. So I've taken Alexander to, like, King Tut's, and, you know, being 18-year-old, and, like, you know, I'm like that to the bouncer, excuse me, mate, going to give me a hand, lifting him up the stairs. And that's what we've done. And my brother will take spasms, he's jerking in his arms, and he can't control that movement. And when there wasn't a smoking ban, one of his big fears was that somebody would turn around, because of the height he's at, and like stub his arm with a cigarette. So I'd be like grabbing people, right, mate, could you stand there, and could you stand there? And right, that's fine, can you kind of form a human chain with him? So, because we'd be at a gig, we'd be going to see his favourite band, and you wouldn't even be able to see the stage, and like, it's just, and I remember seeing like a music journalist, a guy called Billy Sloan, because we'd go and see Mike Peters and the Alarm, who are a kind of Welsh punk rock band from the 80s, And Al's a friend of the band. He's been going to see them for 30 years. I've been going to see them for over 30 years. You know, my first gig was at the Barrowlands at 5. And like, I remember leaving them at the you know, this bit of King Tut's, and I saw Billy. So Billy, hey, I said, me and Alexander are there. And then the next minute, because there's an interval, the next minute me and Alexander are behind the stage. You know, Mike Peters like, no, get him up here on the stage. So you got to just put yourself out there. And I suppose you kind of fight. So that's where my, I suppose, connection, if you want to call it, I don't know, but I try, and I've lived my life for him in a lot of ways, and I'm glad to have done that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's all amazing. Like, there's a lot to unpack there, really, and I think that
we did about 3 years for that.
The biggest thing for me listening to that, right, is I think when people see someone with that kind of disability of that severity, is the idea is that they can't communicate, they can't have not like a conversation with them or relate to them in some way. But clearly that is, you know, you show in your connection with your brother show that's not the case. And if you take the time to make the effort and to get to know somebody, the disability becomes less and less of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's one of the things, you take it for granted because you've figured out a way to communicate, because people will figure things out no matter what, whether it's, I mean, sign language is a formal way of doing it. It's incredible. It's quite formalised, and there's a school and there's training, and that's not to dismiss the complexity and how brilliant and amazing it is, because I can't do it and I feel ashamed that I can't do it. You always figure out something. So, like, I take it for granted, and I'll start talking to my brother. But he's kind of, I don't ever see him through the eyes of a stranger, and that can be difficult, because like my girlfriend, for example, she'd never met Alexander until obviously, you know, we started going out, and she'd never met anyone with any level of disability like that. So for her, it's quite overwhelming. She said, look, I was a bit intimidated because, like, my brother's profoundly disabled anyway, and you think, oh shit, like, where do you go? And people are so scared, so you end up with the classic, and how is he? Is he all right? And, you know, we'll just ask him, you know. And it's a confidence thing, because I think people are so scared. They think, I don't want to say anything wrong, or they don't know how to be confronted with that. And for me, I heard something in your podcast with Amy where she was saying the effort, what it means to our parents if somebody's able to sign thank you. I know that what it means to my brother if someone just takes the time to stop and go, how you doing? What are you up to today, mate? You know, he'll have somebody being cheeky with him, you know, you want to the pub, you know, just, so I feel very fortunate. I've been taught that, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's easier for me, you know, it's easy for me to be an advocate and say, you should do this, but I've never had to approach that as a stranger, how to communicate. But I think if everyone could just take a wee bit more time, because there is always a way of communicating with someone, whether it's a touch, whether it's a sound. We were out, you know, during the pandemic, everyone was going for 10 walks a day, exercising and that, right? And we were on the canal, and I met a mother with her son who had cerebral palsy, and he communicated, they did a thing where they motioned right was yes and left was no. That's how they figured it. Who's teaching them that? I mean, it's just, it blows your mind that people figure it out. So communication is a big thing, and trying to just look at people in the eye and not, you know, fucking look at the wheelchair. Has he got legs? Has he not got legs? Shit. You know, I don't know if you've experienced that.
No, definitely. And I think it all comes back to the awareness part of it. Like, people, you're saying, how are these people figuring this out, figuring out how to do all this? It's like, we're all sort of self-teaching ourselves because we have to do it. But it shows that it can be done. And if there was a better approach of actually showing disability in a more public forum, where people could get normalised and seen, more people like that.
I think that's a brilliant point, because so I did that like wee video on Instagram, or I put it on Instagram, and it's just, I've been going round to see my brother. Most of the time he's been shielding with my parents at the height of the pandemic, and you know, that's a thing in itself where people, it's a lot of nonsense, or it's this, whatever anyone's view is, that's fine. I'm just kind of respectful of whatever people think of something, but when you've got a disability, the stakes are so much higher, so you think, you can't take any chances. So I'd be going round, and I just thought, I'm going to film my interactions at the back door. And I've always wanted to do something to put a video together, because it's so difficult to represent that level of communication. It's quite sophisticated in terms of how would you explain to someone. I need 10 minutes to run through it and make jokes about it to explain how you would talk to Alexander. So the classic sort of, right, disability quote, right, we need somebody disabled on EastEnders, right, get one of the wheelchair guys in, upper body, that's good. And it's great, I'm not denigrating that, or someone with Down syndrome, because you can maybe manage the representation easier because they can understand things, they can take direction, they can talk, there's a physicality there that allows them to do that. A light talker, my brother had one, but he couldn't find a stable way to use it because at one point we had a chin switch and he could, I was a wee guy and we just used to make it swear, fuck off, and my brother being on the wheelchair. So it was great fun, but he can't consistently operate. He doesn't have the motor skills. Yeah. So how, so it's quite, you see a lot of disabilities represented on television programs, all these sorts of things, but there is a whole world of people that aren't getting that. And I was listening to it in the car today, your podcast with Amy, and she was talking, and I never thought about that, people who are deaf, gym classes, how do you know when to stop, how do you know when to start? And the onus is on the people with disabilities. So it's really difficult. I don't think there's a level of representation there, and probably just only recently, literally in the last couple of months, have I thought seriously about, I would like to make more of a difference. I feel a wee bit ashamed that I've not done more until now, because you just kind of get used to getting by in your own life, and I think could we do more? And then that brings a whole other gambit of emotions, because you start thinking, what if people don't like this video? What if they reject that? And that's my brother they're talking about, right? And you get your guard up, or people don't share it. And what's really fascinating is when you do things like that, you think, oh my God, I need to be careful who I share this with, because this could go everywhere. And then you realise it doesn't go anywhere. And actually, people talk about being inclusive. And I've actually sent that to quite a few people, different sort of areas and fields and backgrounds, and sent it to men camp. Not even read it. Now that's fine. I'm not saying that because maybe they're not set up to receive messages, but that just highlighted something we spoke about in the gym. There's an avenue for somebody to communicate off the table. So I sent that to men camp. I said, listen, trying to raise awareness for people who, and I don't even really, I didn't have a cause. It's not like I'm trying to raise awareness to reach a goal. It was just, I've done this thing. I would quite like my brother's story to be told, or his. And then I sent it, for example, to the men camp on Instagram, and maybe the person that runs the social media account doesn't know how to have the message requests off, and a few other people, and then you think, all right. So I think, well, what about people that are actually out there who want to be heard and they're not? So it is something to think about,
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like for me, there's a few things I want to touch on there, but I'll start with the fact that when you're talking about communication and these new...
It was my chair, maybe.
Oh, it's the heater behind you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No worries, mate. So I noticed, when you're talking about communication, one of the things that seems that I've always thought is that through my life, it seems like when people ask about disabilities, the people that are asking, like, for example, if you're wanting to put these things in place, it's never someone like yourself or someone like me that's asked about it. It's usually someone without a disability, and that's one of the big problems. Is you spoke about there how do we put this kind of thing in place? We put it in place by asking people like you. Do you know what I mean? Getting people like you into these scenarios where they can make a difference and say, this is how it works. You're now in a position, having done that your whole life, where you can now show other people, and they're trying to. What happens is they'll have these boxes, and it's like, as long as it ticks the box, it doesn't really matter to them, and that's the issue. I think the biggest thing to tackle it is actually ask the people that have lived it and experienced it.
I think so. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, and again, I think there's a lot of wonderful people out there who are trying their best or working hard, but I've never thought about it in those terms, just really until we spoke last week, and actually it's really had my mind going. And I think, yeah, people who are best placed to be asked aren't usually consulted. I mean, I'll give you the best example. And I'm conscious and very wary because you don't want anyone to look down. Like, as an example, a lot of people with disabilities need to use incontinence pads. We just call them pads, right? And they have changed over the last 20 years. They used to be thick and cushioned and like that, and they're now paper thin and smaller. And that's been a change over the last 20, 25 years. And that affects how people are sat in their wheelchair. So it's less about incontinence. It's more about, well, these things actually provide, good comfort as well as, preventing any accidents or whatever. Because that's just how some people have to live their lives. And I remember, at one point, I think I was down in London and my dad and I thought he's going to have a heart attack here because, you're waiting on health centres delivering pads. It's stuff that's so vital for your everyday, and they say, they're not here. Well, you'll need to get them next week. And you think, what do you mean next week? We can't live without them until, and then someday, someone on the phone, if you keep speaking to me like that, you'll not be getting anything, and you're having to, and it's so like, are people coming out to fix the wheelchair? Yeah. And somebody will say, I'll need to take that away with us.
They're like, what?
Sorry?
Exactly.
Right, and again, I'm looking at you thinking, well, maybe you could get by, Kieran, but my brother would need to lie in his bed. Like, he's got the moulded one. It's no use if you... I mean, my pals are like, can we get a shot out of his wheelchair? I'm like, mate, it's like getting a slide tackle for Bobo Baldi. You don't want it. Because you're sat in it and there's bits with fucking hell. But, like, stuff like that, I mean, I remember we would go on holiday. And again, Al's level of disability, we'd no right taking him on a plane. And what I mean by that is, it's not set up for disabled people. Like, we would get him on... When he was younger, it was easier. As he gets older and his joints become more dislocated and the palsy takes over more and his legs stick out, and you can't get him. And he can't sit up like a normal person and fold his legs down and sit up like that. But we would take him on holiday. My mum would create this, I mean, she stitched this Velcro system herself, right, where we would go, and this was before hand luggage came at a price, right? I mean, it cost us about 600 quid to go on the plane now, but we have hand luggage packed full of pillows. My mum would then pull out this fucking, something at Mission Impossible, this Velcro strap. My brother would sit in the middle. We'd have to book the front 3 seats. My brother would sit in the middle. We would strap him round through the back seat. My mum would tie it. I'd sit on one side, my dad or my sister, my mum would sit on the other side. We'd sit from behind. It was a hellish ordeal. But when you would get to the airport and you'd get right up to the boarding gate thing, and then they go, and you'd planned this for months. You need to get a letter for the doctor to say that he was disabled, stuff like that. And then you would get there, and then no hampering, but some wee Jimmy would be like that, with the ground crew, with the bib would be like, right, so you'll need to get that and just come into this wheelchair here, and you need to have the wee hospital wheelchair. And you'd be like that. Now, he doesn't mean it, but he'd be thinking, mate, are you fucking off your head? But my dad would be up, honestly, he'd be like, and you'd get onto the plane, and we used to always look at any of the exit rows, and we'd be like, could we not just get him in one of the exits? Legs would have a bit of space, and they'd be like, well, no, because, that's somebody who needs to open the exit door and all that, and you think, fucking hell. And I remember, we didn't go on holiday for, I think I went on holiday when I was 5 or 6, my mum and dad, and we didn't go on holiday again until we were about 12 or 13 or something like that. Whereas everybody goes on holiday every year now, don't they? But we went, and it was a classic. I remember it. We were going to go to Ibiza. My mum and dad booked on teletext, phoning off the teletext, and the classic salesman pattern. It was last week. Oh, yes, I've been there. No, and we were saying, look, is this suitable for my son's disabled and he's in a wheelchair? Is this? Yes, no. I've actually stayed there myself. The old classic, right? And we got there. It was Portinach, and there were 14 steps to the reception, and then there were another 6 steps to the lift. We had to get shifted 3 days into that. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's like, so you just but listen, I don't want anyone to think like I use comedy a lot, and my family uses comedy a lot, because I would say overwhelming, it's all been positive. Like I could talk about my brother today. It's hilarious. We've done so much, and we'll come back to it. We foiled a robbery, me and my brother foiled a robbery in Summerson, right? Stopped house getting rain and never grassed up to the police. I became a DJ because of my brother. You know, I've DJed night all because I've taken him to gigs with me. We do loads, but that's the side, I suppose, the sort of side that I've never really related to anyone and thought, actually, you know what, there should be more done to that. And like you say, it is not a world set up for people with any level of disability, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I've experienced, see everything you just said there like that. I've experienced it all, and one of the things that became apparent to me.
So there's sorry to interrupt.
That's all right.
That's my brother. That's him in his flat, which is round the corner, and that's his girlfriend, or sorry, it was his then girlfriend. And he's got his friend Lynn, who've grown up, Debbie, Jerry. So I mean, I was telling you about Debbie. I think she's got former cerebral palsy, and I remember cutting past her at the bus stop one day. She's in a wheelchair. She'd been up to see my brother, and then she was just getting a bus up the road. And I said to Debbie, "What happens if it rains?" She just went, "That's it." You just, you know. So you think? I don't know, man.
There's so many things that people don't think about. That's the thing. Is even being in a wheelchair my whole life, right? I when I got to meet more people in wheelchairs, I went to a mainstream school and I was the only one in the wheelchair, and I never really met anyone else with a disability, which would cause me a lot of like problems in my head, like what's wrong with me basically. And I think when I met other people with disabilities and seen the kind of different varieties, you realise that we're all like everybody was going through the same thing, but just in different levels and different ways. And the lack of actually conversation, and because when you spoke about your dad earlier, for example, like I know it was an emotional topic for you, but just in the sense of his want to protect him was through the fact that the perception of was that people were going to look at him funny or whatever the case may be.
Well, it's the easiest. Not doing anything requires the least amount of effort, and I don't mean the effort, but that not doing something requires the least amount of risk.
Yeah,
if you stay in the house, you'll be okay, but you can also guarantee that nothing else is going to happen. You go out, something brilliant might happen, but you're also exposing yourself to a whole load of other things. And I mean, like I did a stand-up comedy gig a couple of years ago now in Edinburgh, and it was just a wee sort of open mic night, and a wheelchair user appeared, a guy called Mark Cooper, and I made a beeline because I always try and make an effort, just because that's how I've lived my life with Alexander. So chatting about him, and he was there with another wheelchair user, and it was his wife. And you know, he was wanting to do his bit of stand-up, and honestly, this cafe was not wheelchair friendly at all. But you know, he got in, and there was a wee stage, and he was at the back, and it came to his turn, and they said, right, well, you can just do it for there, right? And I was like, no, we're all turning round. If he's doing it from there, fine, but we're not having him sat behind us and he's doing a stand-up behind our back. We'll turn round and be all sat on the stage. But he did this funny bit, and he's got a stutter and all that, and I stammer, and I just take my mum's cue and things like that. If something's funny, I'll just laugh. I'll just embrace the laughter. This guy's, and I'm like, I'm pissing myself laughing because it's funny. It's part of what's going on. I'm not going to go, oh fuck, he's stammering. So I'm fucking rolling about the floor laughing because what he's doing is funny and what he's saying is funny. But what he did, he spoke about getting the bus, and he says, "You don't allowed one wheelchair user per bus. They've only got space for one wheelchair on each bus." He went, so if I go out with my wife, he says, we always travel home together. They always keep thinking we've had a fallout. And it was very funny, but I thought, oh, fuck, I've never had to think about that. I've never had to think about my brother. If I've taken him on a bus, I have to think about what if somebody else. So you always think about yourself, and like you say, you think you've got it tough until you speak to you speak to someone else. There's
so much. I mean, this is the thing though. Like as a society, we're almost letting this part go. We're letting people down because, seeing in terms of the technology and how we've got all these things so easily like accessible to us, yet we're still alienating a big group of society that are just having to deal with. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't have a bus that could have two wheelchairs on it. There's no reason why you couldn't have these things.
After I'd met you, spoke to my dad. I was round at the back door and was telling him about it, and he was saying, you know, he said there was a bus, right, that so where we lived in Summerson we lived right in front of what was called the disabled, it was called the disabled centre, right, or some people would call it the spazzy centre, right, which is, you know, you've got to kind of live round that sort of stuff, and you're fighting on, you know, oh, am I gonna have to say, don't say that, and then you just have to fucking live with that, you know, flying around the ether, because how much can you fight as well? That's the other thing. You think, what's the fucking point in trying to, do you know what I mean? And then I'm putting myself at odds with everyone. So it was an adult training centre, and it wasn't suitable for Al anyway, in the regards to, because you had limited carers, you know, because that was typically maybe more people like yourself, able-bodied upper wheelchair users, whereas my brother needs almost one-to-one care full time, and so that's where he would go. So we lived right at the back, so it was kind of handy for a long time. And my dad was saying, "Hi, you know, there was a bus that used to take wheelchair users. It was only for wheelchair users, and it would go into the town." So my dad said, "Oh, brilliant, we'll take him up, and we'll, you know, get him on the wee bus." And the guy went, "Aye, but yous are not allowed on. It's just for wheelchair users only." Well, that right. So what do you propose happens next? And again, it's not the bus driver's fault, but somebody who's thought, "Oh, that's great. Well, there's wheelchair users, then we'll just pop them onto the bus." And Mum was, "So what would you then do with my brother? Like, fucking leave him?" Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's all these things that you've experienced where you think, mate, I remember, like, my dad was a taxi driver for years, and you'd phone a TOA taxi and you need to say, "No, it needs to be a TX1. You probably know the taxis that you can get. It needs to be a TX1. Right, and then they would send a different taxi and you'd be like, "Mate, it needs to be a this." "Ah, no, listen, I know how to put wheelchair." You're like, "Mate, fucking," you know, you'd be pulling your hair out, man. You'd be like, "Please listen." Or like my dad going to look at disability vehicles, you know, up at Allied, and the guy telling you, no, his wheelchair will be fine for this. And you're like, "And do you have a disabled son?" "No." Yeah. And again, I suppose most of your life ends up, I feel, very combative, because you're fighting all the time. And I think there's a bit of you that ends up going, you just want to get on with your life. And what I mean by that is you fight because you have to fight, but you don't take up the fight maybe further or for anything else. And again, relating it back to what Amy was saying, she kind of feels like she now wants to be the voice of the deaf community, or a voice, and I admire that, and I would like to do something in conjunction with everyone, because I feel like that now. I feel like, can I use my experiences to progress that in a way that hasn't been done before, or just to help? Because, you know, I'm really fortunate, we're really fortunate, we know a certain amount, but growing up, we didn't have care for my brother. Like, we just got on with it, you know what I mean? Like, we didn't know you could get your own house or own flat. We didn't know that, you know, until you meet somebody else and they say, "Oh, you know that he should have carers." "Oh, how's that?" And so you don't know any of these things. Yeah. And that's the people with a disability. It's so easy to suppress them or forget about them, because a lot of the time, traditionally, they are so passive. So it's just, aye. And that's where the cuts always happen and everything else, because it's just, they're not going to march. Yeah. You know, if you're putting it into basic terms, they're going to storm Westminster. Do you know what I mean? One bus at a time. You know, so exactly. It's those sorts of things, you know.
But this is the problem. This is the fight you're talking about, is the fight against the lack of equality, the lack of representation. Because when you look at the fact that, you know, we can't do your traditional, like you say, marches and do the things, but as we become more aware of this through social media, we are currently fighting the fight that should have been fought like years and years ago. And it's like, despite the fact that we're all evolving as a society, this group of people have been like sort of left behind, and but by you coming forward and talking about this is what could potentially make it easier for the next person, you know?
I hope so. And like I say, it's like, I could speak about this for hours, because it's a conversation I've never. I would normally always talk about just all the things that growing up with my brother entailed. Like I say, my mum, an incredible woman. Like, my mum came here when she was 12. She was born in India, and she came to Scotland when she was, I think, 10 or 12. And my mum was a model for years. When, you know, I know everyone's a model on Instagram, but she was an actual proper model. But she married my dad young. She had Alexander young, so these models would be off out in nightclubs at night, and my mum would be away up home looking after my brother. Then my mother became a self-taught aerobics instructor, and she taught aerobics all over Summerston and Maryhill for years. So we always had music, because my mum always did the music for our classes. Alexander loved music, loved Live Aid, loved bands, so I would play his records. I'd go into the room and play with him for hours, play records, kid on with the radio station. And then we would always buy equipment, DJ equipment, decks and lights, and strobe lights. So, you know, when I was, I mean, and this is all true, like, when he was at the adult training centre in Summerston, he'd come home and the carers would get him on the bus, would say, listen, he got his carers, my brother, tell his carers, to phone the local primary schools, do you need a DJ? And I had to go and he'd be like, you need to come and DJ at St Blaine's primary school for the school disco and at Caldercourt. And the carer would push Alexander in the wheelchair, and we had these CD decks in a flight case. And I'd go down to Asda and get a trolley. Now, I think we were single-handedly responsible in Summerston for introducing the £1 levy for, because we used the trolleys for everything. Football, we made goals out of trolleys. I mean, we made nets out the trolleys. You know, like we just had a cascade of, right? Yeah. Tennis, we'd play tennis in the street every year when Wimbledon was on. That was two Asda trolleys upturned, that was your net. I mean, we used them for everything, honestly. And then I would go down, get a trolley for Asda, put this flight case in it, and I pushed it along to Caldercourt Primary School to do the disco, me and Alexander DJing. So, like, that's how I became a DJ, for example. I started DJing in town when I was 17. Used to do Shack, Bamboo, Carbon, all these places. But it was all because of my brother. I remember taking my brother in with me on a Tuesday night. Used to DJ in a place called Bar Logic, which was on Socky Hall Street, and took him in a taxi and had him DJing with me for the night and take him up the road after. So I've always spoken about those things and like all the things that being Alexander's brother has entailed, you know. But and I wouldn't change it, and I love it, you know, that's he's the kind of the focal point. Like that's us at the Alarm. So Mike, I could talk about this story. Mike Peters and the Alarm, they had a couple of top 10 hits in the 80s, right? They were like the Welsh U2. But U2 were singing about the Troubles in Ireland, and Wales they were singing about the mines shutting in Wales. You know, it wasn't the same, but they're real rock and roll guys. And they've been on the go for, let's say, 30 odd years. So Alexander went to see them as a child. We go to gigs and people will come up to me and they'll be like, is that your brother? I'll say, and they went, I saw him, he's been coming to gigs for years, isn't he? I saw him at the Glasgow Union to see Mike Peters in 1982. You know, that's how long he's been going to see them. Yeah. And they, you know, like for me, you know, so we went to I think it was the O2 Academy. That's his favourite band. For me, the most special night I've ever had was there was an acoustic tour that Mike Peters did, and again it was at King Tut's, and it was an interactive sort of thing. So we just went and you could fill out a slip of paper with your song request, and their big hit was called Spirit of 76. My brother was born in 1976, right? Good year that. Good year. So I'm just there with Al. I was working at Satan at the time. I think a boy in my work was an Alarm fan, and Tony the chef from the Tom Tom was an Alarm fan, because there's not very many fans about, but they're fervent. And I nipped away and I said, oh, blah, 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 blah. Could you play this for your old pal, Alexander, Spirit 76? So as the gig reaches a crescendo, because he's playing, obviously, he plays all the kind of peripheral songs, and then it's building, but... And then it gets to, must be coming to a big one. He's like, right, this is for Johnny and Jamie, and you know they met in '85, and they're still together. This is for you guys. Like, this is for Big Ted. Big Ted came down on the bus for Cardiff to see us. This for you. He's gone through about 20 of these, and then he saved it to the last one, and he's then. And the Alarm's all about fighting the power. I mean, they're proper rock and roll guys. They're cool, actually. I mean, honestly, they're amazing. And he says, listen. This guy, it's all about the resistance and all that, and fight the power and the movement. He says, this guy's the movement, and he's our friend, and he's been coming to the gigs for 30 years, and he just did this big thing, and I was choking up, man. And it was like, this is for you, Alex. And he changed the lyrics to include Alexander's name in it and all that, you know, and like, he's fucking in the wheelchair, going like that, you know what I mean? And people are roaring about it. It was magical, man. Do you know what I mean? So like, all that stuff is part of it. But I suppose now it's looking at the other stuff, and I kind of feel like maybe that's the kind of thing I want to maybe take on a bit more. And I suppose it just all came in an instant from seeing you on, I think somebody had reposted your story on Instagram. I sent you that video. And then before you know it, that's a week down the line, I'm saying, right, in my head, I'm going, right, I'm going to speak to Amy and we'll put on a comedy gig, we'll get Kieran and we'll do some, you know. Yeah. And I'm full of ideas, but I would like to try and make something happen because, like you say, it's a world where I feel that you don't want to be confronted by your own inadequacy, or you don't want to be confronted by something that makes you uncomfortable. And I think disability can make people feel uncomfortable. I think it can make people, I don't mean see the worst in themselves, but it can make you look inwards and think, oh, fuck, I don't like that. Because I think sometimes you look at people and you think, I could do more as a person. And you think, fuck that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, because I felt that looking at you. That's when you're doing that challenge and I think, fuck, there's no excuse. Like, he's doing something. Why aren't you doing something? You know, and it's that's, I hope that's not taken in a patronising way, because it's definitely not. It's just, you know, there is a bit of that. I think you think, I'd rather not confront myself with that. And it's like you say, one of the key things I've heard that's upset me during COVID is people, let's just fucking get back to it. And the people that need to shield, just shield the people that need it. All right, cool. Just because that's what they did to disabled people, I believe, in the 50s and the 60s and beyond that. They just shipped them into care homes or residential homes. When my brother was born, I believe my parents were asked the question, do you want to take him home? You want to take him home? Fuck me. Aye. You know, so I think there's a big element of that.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And see, listening to all this, I think one of the things as well is, like, when you're talking about people feeling like they get uncomfortable and they feel like they should be doing more. And I think you're totally right with that. And it's something that's not really talked about enough, in the sense of everybody's kind of everybody's got things that happen to them in their life, whether they've got a disability or not. And it's like you end up maybe not going for your full potential, maybe not doing as much as you can, and when you don't necessarily try and do your best, and then you see someone like Alexander really going for it and really living his life to the full, that can make people fully aware of what they're not doing.
I think that's a really good point, but what I've also got to, I suppose, caveat, because sometimes it's easy to look from the outside and you think, that person's amazing, look at what they're living with. But I fall into that trap, and I see Alexander every day. I feel sorry for myself, you know. So it's the classic. There's always somebody worse than you, right? But I've grown up with Alexander and lived with him pretty much my whole life, and yet I've still fallen into that trap. Why me, right? Why is life tough? You know, I've given up at times, and I fucking live with my brother, or he's there. I see that every day, the injustice, the inequality. I see I see how grateful he is for everything in his life, how happy he is, and you think, James, what's your problem? You know, but like I say, we can become so self-indulgent, and I've done it, so I can't turn and say, it makes me grateful every day. Well, it doesn't, because it just becomes your brother, and it's just another thing, so that's the other side of it.
But, that it's really important to say that, because you are human as well, and you have your own experience in life and things to go through. And I think people put too much pressure on themselves. Like, when we're talking about people feeling uncomfortable from this, one of the most important things to point out about it is that it's important to feel uncomfortable about it, because the only way that it changes is if you acknowledge that, and then you can go, well, why do I feel uncomfortable about this, and how can I then look at it in a different way? The only way that you're going to change anything is by putting it in people's faces to begin with.
Absolutely. And I think that's, going back to probably what I spoke about earlier, that's where there's a bit of difficulty. I think at times where you think, do I want to fight with this? Do I want to push that out? Because I don't want anyone, like, one of the things, for example, is you do a video or something like that, and I don't want anyone to turn around and go, he's fucking spastic. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because someday people say the most ridiculous things, and it's a troll or whatever it is, and you think, I don't want anyone to say that. So you think, do I want to put my head above the parapet because you're going to expose yourself more? So it's I find it difficult. I think as well, it's just, I think I've never known anything else. I've never known that I had an experience to talk about. Like, I just knew that, like, I used to take, when I worked at Satanta, we didn't have enough care for Alexander. As the way they made cuts, you used to get a kind of a designated carer at whatever training centre he was at, or adult centre. But we only had enough for 4 days. So what were we going to do for 5? So I used to take my day off on a Thursday so I could look after my brother, because my dad worked in the taxis. So for him to get a chance of making any money, he'd need to be out the door at 8. But my mum went to uni when she was 45, by the way, became a school teacher at 51. So she just started teaching. My dad had finished in the shipyards and was working in the taxis. And then all of a sudden, you know, like my brother's bus, sometimes it would come at 8:30, sometimes it would come at 9:30, sometimes it would drop him off at 2:30, sometimes it would drop him off at 4. So we would all pitch in, like my sister, me, you know, I would take my day off to be a Thursday to look after Alexander. Just, I shared a room with Alexander for the best part of 20 odd years. I would put him to bed most nights. I would get him up and washed and dressed to help my mum and dad. I'd get into school and I'd been in trouble and, get a bit of an attention seeker, James, if you not get... No, they didn't know. I'd been up all night with my brother because he'd been up having spasms and no well. I wouldn't tell my parents until the morning and they'd say, why didn't you tell us? And, well, I wanted you to get a break, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, all these things I just thought was, that's just what you do. It's normal and you would do it anyway, but I didn't know that there was, like, another way. And again, like, my mum and dad, I sent them to Barcelona when I was 25 or something like that. I think I'd paid off all my credit card debts, so I had a bit of money for a change. And I booked them flights and hotels to go to Barcelona, and they went away for 3 nights because they hadn't been away on their own for 20 years, something like that. And even that was like, and I think I know a lot, but I know I don't know everything. I only know my own experience. But I would look after Alexander to a fairly high degree in terms of I could wash, dress, feed him, communicate, look after him. And I'm not a parent, but the moment my mum and dad walked out the door to go to the airport, poof, it was 24/7. Just in the back of your mind all the time was, right, got up, rest, ready. My sister, who's amazing with my brother, she's a female, and she's maybe not been as physical with some of the care with Alexander, but I kind of felt like that was my role almost, and like she's just such a brilliant sister to him in so many different ways. But like, so she would like, come in with a cup of tea for me and help me get ready, and I'd get him up, wash, dress, right, what's he having for his fucking dinner, right, I need to go and get that, right, can you put that in the washing machine? And I think, fucking, how do you do it? And where is the support network for people who are caring with those for disabilities as well? Because I don't know if your parents are doing a lot for you, but it takes a toll as well, physically, mentally, just all the time, and that affects then your relationships with your parents, because my mum and dad can be really overbearing because they've not been able to evolve beyond everyday parenting. At this stage of our lives, my sister's 31, is she 30 or 32? Alexander's 44, I'm 38. This is the stage where traditionally you'd be mates. Do you know what I mean? You'd be getting bevied and out and hanging about together, whereas my mum and dad have still got to be such functional parents that they can't make the distinction between my sister. So my mum will be like, yes, well, don't you be taking too many paracetamols. It's just, she's still, you think, Mum, I'm nearly 40, and that's the way that's the way it is. You don't think about the impact of everybody else, and I've never thought about that, and it's just from talking to you that it's just kind of almost flicked a switch in my mind.
Well, that's it. I mean, having these kind of conversations and having people be aware of the fact that these struggles happen, like they're so that we don't get any sort of coverage or any sort of anyone talking about it in this kind of level where you're really going, this is what goes on a day-to-day basis and who's helping who here. And I think that what we're really seeing now is people are becoming more and more aware. And as you're talking about all these things of what's going on in your life and his life and your family's life, it makes people start to go, are we really doing this the right way? When we're talking about equality, is it really real or is it just to tick a box?
Well, I think one of the things I've thought about in recent years is carers. Like, we don't pay carers enough.
100%.
Carers get what, 8, 9, 10 quid, I don't know what I mean, right? And the problem is, it's not a permanent job. It's all through care agencies. And we've had so many carers over the years with Alexander. We've had good carers, we've had bad carers, we've had carers from social, you know. But you get a good carer and they make a hell of a difference to someone's life. Like, they can change someone's life. They're interactive. And Alexander has such a high level of care. He needs somebody that's going to be physically capable. His wheelchair's heavy. You know, you need to be so conscious of how you getting him into a hoist or lifting him, feeding him, giving him a drink. But then he needs mental stimulation. Whereas, so like you say, he doesn't fall into that box where people say, oh, yeah, take him to the park. And you walk about with these big fucking insecurities about that, these defensive sort of frailties almost, where I remember an ex-girlfriend of mine said once, oh, do you want to just get him out for a bit of fresh air? And I was like, it's not a dog, it's not a fucking dog, you know. And she wasn't meaning anything by it, but I'm thinking, fucking that's my brother, you know. It's good carers. People don't understand, like, you know, my brother needs stimulators, so he needs somebody that's going to talk to him. He hates watching the telly, doesn't it? You know, so somebody like just walk up in front of the telly. No, if I doesn't like that, he wants to listen to music. He wants to listen to George Bibi. That's what he likes, right? He wants to have a chat. Like, I love saying, right, fucking most overrated band in the world. And he'll be like, right, Red Hot Chili Peppers. And we joke about if we had a festival, I go, Alexander, Bruce Springsteen. He go, overrated? Aye, overrated. He'll say, right, Bruce, you're getting 3 songs, big man. One of them better be Born to Run, and then half the stage. Right, next. And, you know, he needs that. But you get a good carer, you make a bond, they're brilliant. And then they turn up and they say, listen, I've got a job in the railways. You can't blame that person. That guy's or female's got a full-time job, better wages, you know what I mean? And we are paying shrapnel to these people, and they make such a difference to people's lives. That is. So that is the Texas Gold Disc. So our cousin Eddie's in the band Texas. So Alexander's favourite band, Mike Peters and Alarm, Texas. There's another set of fucking decks. I think I got them the tractor mixer for Christmas one year. Eddie always gives us the gold discs and stuff like that. So, I mean, he turned up with his carer test WG3. It was the Texas. It was on the video I've put up. My mum saying, is it 86 or for I Don't Want to Love Her or 89? And he knows, honestly, his memory's unbelievable. He's like 89. So he it sold out. Me and my sister tried to get tickets, sold out, and I went, look, I'll see Eddie, because I see my cousin Eddie up and down Great Western Road all the time. And Eddie lived with us at one point, right, before they made it in the band. So I got him one day in Great Western Road, and I said, listen, Alexander's wanting tickets for Texas. Listen, put him down in the guest list, right, whatever, you need to pay because it's a charity. He goes, no bother. He turned up with his carer, right? And again, there's a fear, I think, maybe, should I go down? Do you know what I mean? But turns up with his carer, David, gets into text. He fucking goes to the after party and he's like that to them all, hey, let's all go back to a party at my flat. He's chinning Charlene Spiteri and all that, you know what I mean?
Brilliant, mate.
So, sorry, what was I saying? I've got a big tangent.
About the carers, you were talking about
the carers, you know, we're not paying carers properly, we're not encouraging, and I believe there's talk of maybe a national carers service the same as NHS. You need something like that, because what a brilliant job that would be if it was good money in it. And I'm not saying 50 grand a year, but if it was a 30 grand a year,
yeah, it should be.
You would do it. You'd fucking pack up the now and you start, look, hang about with my brother, this guy who likes music and likes to go to the pub, and why would you not want to do that? You know, but we don't do stuff like that, and that's like you say, the care aspect and all these things, it's not set up the right way, you know. It's poor.
They need to be paid for how much the job means to that person. Like, you know, in wheelchair football, for example, I have a bunch of friends that are in wheelchairs, and there was a few of them recently throughout the pandemic that spoke to me and came to me and said about how they were really close with certain carers to then get transferred or moved, and there's this sort of emotional bond that people don't realise it. I understand it's a professional thing, but if you're with somebody 24/7, you're going to connect with the person. It's impossible not to, because you're asking somebody not to be human then.
It's hard as well, because you've then got, like, you've got to remember, say to my mum and my dad, look, you've got to remember that they work for us as well, in terms of you can't expect them to deliver the same level of care that you or I would. You can't get upset. You just got to manage people. So, like, you know, one of my brother's carers, he likes watching the telly. So sometimes when I go around, I say, going to just stick music on for him. That's it. Because see that boy, he's a brilliant carer for my brother. Loves him. He's amazing. But you can't get too wounded over that. You can't take it too to heart, because, like you say, it is a job, and it's difficult to try and manage those aspects, because you just want the best care for your son, your brother, your daughter, and you want people to take it seriously. But like you say, there's such an emotional connection there, and then it's just, oh, they've got a job somewhere else, and you know, it's devastating. My brother's upset because we've had a carer leave recently, and that's what happens, you know, and the carer didn't tell us. You know, when we phoned up, they didn't say, oh, she's asked for a P45, right? You know, and you can't get bent out of shape over that.
Yeah.
There's a time I would have, because you think, well, you just, you know what, and see if she's able to come back at some point, we'll take her back, because that's something, you know, it's like you say, but the instability of that job, the irregularity of it, the pay, you're not, and I don't want anyone to have to experience, not as it that there's it's bad experience having anyone with a disability, but for society to understand, you don't want anyone to have to actually experience it before it makes a difference. You know, because if everyone had someone with a disability, you would think about it differently, but that's lopsided. Is that the only way we're going to, like you say, affect change or create change? You know, it's easier said than done. It comes back to that sort of, doesn't really affect me, so I can forget about it. You don't want to have empathy forced upon you. You know, you want to try and maybe create an awareness, and it's hard, you know.
Definitely. The whole point about the carers as well is like they're with people all the time and making such a difference to their lives. Like you're saying, when somebody can communicate with Alexander, it can make such a big difference to how he feels of himself and his whole able to like enjoy life. And that value is it's priceless, really. And these, like you said before, these people are getting paid pennies to do this. You know what I mean?
Well, one of my brothers there's a core group of sort of friends and family. And one of my brother's favourite people is Dougie the bus driver, right? And he's not actually a bus driver. No, he is. He would drive Al's bus, right? And he's right Rangers man, Dougie, right? And Alexander likes Celtic. He's not a big Celtic fan, but he likes Celtic. And Dougie would always slag him, right? And, you know, he's a rubbish, your mob, right? And Alexander loved that, and he would just... Dougie came to Alexander's 40th, and Dougie stopped driving Alexander 15 years ago, or longer, maybe 20 years ago, because that was the guy who just drove the bus, that just made an effort, liked what Alexander was about, you know, because we would say, look, my brother would say, Alexander knows the routes so well, just visually, that we'd have to say, if you get a new bus driver, but look, mate, you need to take this route, or you need to explain to him, don't worry, because my brother would be like, here, wait a minute, I don't recognise this, and he can only see the fucking tops of the trees, and he'd be like, no, this isn't the Great Western Road, we shouldn't be, you know, and all these things you don't think, oh, that's going to impact somebody, like, because does he think he's going somewhere else, you know? So it's just about, like you say, communication. So if you've got somebody that makes a wee effort talking to someone, just even in passing, you go, he's cracking that guy, you have a pint, you know. And I've seen like my brother, the thing that blows my mind is he's got his own like Facebook and stuff like that, and blows my mind when I see him on Facebook and he's out somewhere, and I'm like, fucking hell, he's out, you know. I just find it amazing, because I thought, well, if he's not with my mum or dad or me or Lauren, who's he with? You know, because there's a kind of...
You're programmed to think that way.
Yeah, and there's a fear, like I have fucking mad dreams, man, where Alexander's on his own in the wheelchair out in the street, and I'm like, why the fuck's left you here? And when I dream and I talk to Alexander in my dream, he doesn't speak like normal. He still speaks with his, you know, still communicates. So it's mad. And that's not, I think we spoke about that. That's my normality, and I don't want that to change. You know, I don't want to feel that he's defective or deficient. He's he's got a disability. It is what it is. But, you know, if people could make more of an effort. I've said to friends, listen, pop up and see my brother, I'd love to see you and all that. They don't do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, because people always think, and that's not admonishing anyone, but people, I don't want to go, I don't want to get in the way. Do you know what I mean? Whereas actually, you would love that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, somebody cutting up to see him or whatever, because that improves and increases that normalisation. Do you know what I mean? You don't need to, you know.
Exactly. If by doing a wee bit, every wee bit that you do, you're making that difference to someone's life and their awareness.
Well, I know that you had John Hartson on here, and I've known John best part of 20 years now. I met him through my brother, if that makes sense. Right? He didn't introduce us or anything. He didn't go like that, James, there's John. He would, but fucking pointing. No, I was working in Cruise. I was about 19, 20, and I was only DJing one night a week at this point. I'd been bumped off a gig. So I needed to get a job, and I was on uni one day a week because I'd failed a class. Didn't tell my mum that. I was like, yes, I think I'm just going to do this politics class. I actually don't like this economics one, but I'd been booted out it. So I was working in Cruise, and John Hartson came in, and because of this band, Mike Peters and the Alarm, they're Welsh. So my brother's default position is he loves anything Welsh. So John Hartson's in, I'm selling him a couple of pairs of shoes, and I says, listen, by the way, my brother loves you, right? Because Welsh. And he was like, listen, no problem. I'm going to leave my stuff here. I'll come back and I'll sign a couple of photos. And as it turned out, we ended up walking to his car, and he signed a strip for me. I gave it to my brother, and then I was DJing in Trash a few nights later, and it was a Tuesday night. That's the footballers' night, because they used to take a Wednesday off. So that was Tuesday night, was all your football players would be out on a Tuesday. And I bumped into him again. He walked past the DJ box, and I was saying, big man, how you doing? And he was like, how's your brother? Listen, take my number. And we kept in touch. But what happened was he ended up coming to work at Satanta once he retired. And I was working there, so he phoned me. He's like, listen, put in a good word for me. And I'm giving it, listen, I'll speak to the gaffer. But obviously his agent sorted all that. And we would work together quite closely. We'd hang out. And then he ended up renting a flat round the corner from where I stayed. And just randomly, he'd be like, right, we'll go for a coffee. And he'd be like, I'll just come round and see your brother. And he would just, that's a Welsh accent I was doing there. But he'd be like, I'll just pop round and see your brother. And like, he'd just turn up at the door, and he'd make an effort. And like, I remember what was really funny was he phoned me. She said, I'll come round and see your mum and dad. And that. And he phoned me. He says, does your brother like football? I says, I mean, my brother doesn't. He doesn't like watching it. He likes the theatre of certain games, but I just, likes football. Hartson turns up and all that, and he'd gone into the corner shop, bought a football magazine, and he's like, here, like, this is for you, right? And Alexander's like that. And John's going, what's he trying to say? And be like, nothing. And he's like that. Alexander, you won't shoot Alexander. Alexander's going like that. What's he saying to you? He's like that. Tell him should have got my music magazine, doesn't like the football magazine. You know what I mean? So, like, but making that effort, as he always has done, it makes a huge sort of difference. And also makes a difference in how you're held in regard. You know, like John Hartson's held in like royalty in my family because he's always made like an effort. Do you know what I mean? He always asks after everyone, how's everyone getting on? How's your mum and dad? You know, how's your brother? That's all you want. And you feel same like Scott McDonald. I actually DJ'd at Scott, name drop now for like 10 minutes to go, name drop. I DJ'd at Scott McDonald's wedding, and he used to come into Carbon. I used to DJ there, and we've got mates. My mate's wee brother was in the same Motherwell team as him, and like Alexander loves him for some reason. He still says I could do a job for Celtic now, which he probably could, but like he would always ask after my brother. He would be on the phone. I remember sticking him on the phone to Scotty one day and stuff, just stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It just makes it, and like my brother loves Ali McCoist. Loves that. I mean, he ruined my childhood, Ali McCoist, but my brother loves Ali McCoist because they'd met Ali McCoist at a gig. His pal Jerry, my brother's pal Jerry's wheelchair bound, but he's able-bodied upper.
Is that Jerry Jameson?
Yes.
He plays Polish football.
You're joking, Jerry. I say he goes, James, that's my brother's. That's my brother's best pal.
No way, really? That's so weird.
I have known Jerry my whole life. Like I remember, I would have races round my house on my hands and knees, Jerry go, I'll beat you, because he's right. So Debbie and Jerry are together. So that's Alexander, Jerry Jameson, and
That's so weird, man.
So he would that's why Alexander loves Alan McCoist, because him and Jerry were at a gig. They see Alan McCoist, and Jerry went, "Oh, I could do a better job than you, and I'm in this wheelchair," and he would just slot. And I worked with Ali at one point at Satanta, just a great guy again, but just somebody who takes a bit of time and interest, whether you've got a disability or not. And I think that's, I suppose, at the core of me trying to name drop and all that here, is anyone taking a bit of time and a wee bit of effort makes such a big difference. But I'm not preaching here, because I have also dismissed people in my life. I have also not given people time. I have also looked beyond a person and not known their story. So I'm guilty of that too. Do you know what I mean? I can't sit here and
but you're also human, mate. You know, like, you've obviously been through a lot, and I think it's important to recognise. You were talking about earlier how you were always, sometimes you feel guilty because you want to do more, and I understand that completely, like wanting to put that message out. But it's also recognising that you've done a hell of a lot so far. Do you know what I mean? By being that brother for him, and being the way, just treating him the way that he should be treated. You've done so much by doing that.
Absolutely. Like I say, it was such a big, most things in your life are related back to childhood trauma, and everyone has childhood trauma. No matter how loving and stable and brilliant a childhood you've had, you will always have some form of trauma that affects you later on in your life with how you behave. And like, Alexander has been such a big part of my personality and my identity, because that's what I've known, and it's what I'm passionate about. I love my brother, I love my sister, obviously. Again, that's affected my relationship with my sister, because when my sister's 5 years younger than me, when she was old enough to start going to like nightclubs and stuff like that, I would kind of get her in or whatever. I wouldn't really want to spend, I didn't spend a lot of time with my sister as pals, because I felt, well, we're excluding Alexander. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah,
If we're hanging about together in a nightclub, we're not hanging about with Alexander. So I've had to also reconcile with my sister how that would maybe, because you only think about yourself. I never thought about how that would impact my sister growing up, for example. So it also affects how you are with people. So I'm quite combative. Some people have called me arrogant. I probably have been arrogant, or am, and dismissive, and because you use a certain personality to fight and to shield there. And I remember somebody saying to me once, "You use your brother to batter people," right? And they didn't mean that I was using a wheelchair to fucking smash them about, right? Although Alexander says he would like that. You would act a certain way, and then if people got close to you, they'd realise, oh, you do this for your brother? Fucking, why don't you act like that all the time? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you were kind of not using it, but you would conceal that part of your life. And if somebody managed to scratch the surface or find that out, it kind of opened up their perception of you.
Yeah.
So all these things affect how you sort of, I suppose, how you live your life. So for me, I'm an attention seeker. I probably didn't get the amount of attention that maybe I would have. I probably speak too much because so it's actually reconciling, right, okay, it's just, this is what you've done and that's why, but trying to account for your own behaviour and improve your own behaviour as much as you can. And, that's just, for me, it's nothing other than an absolute privilege. But what's quite funny as well is I've burst into tears because my brother doesn't need me anymore, right? And that's an amazing thing. But I remember I was speaking to a counsellor about this one. I burst into tears because I'm like, it doesn't need me. Like if I used to come home from London and I didn't leave Glasgow till I was 26, I never thought about going to a uni in another city. Not because I was told we need you to look after your brother. Because I thought, I don't want to ever leave my mum or dad because they need me, my sister. So I left when I was 26 because I had to, for my own reasons. And I remember this overwhelming feeling of guilt because I used to be a TV presenter. I don't like talking about that often, right? I got a job presenting on the shopping channels and I wasn't due to start for, say, a week. So I was in London in this flat. I was just lying on the couch. I had this overwhelming sense of guilt, like, you should be doing something. You should be helping my mum or my dad. Yeah. But because I was far away enough that I physically couldn't, I wasn't an hour away, that I better go and pop in and see my mum and dad. Because I can see my mum and dad every 2-3 days. I had this feeling of guilt, and it was like, oh fuck, this is what sort of doing something for yourself is like. And again, I was not encouraged to not do that, you know. So it's just trying to equate how that's affected you and your life. Like I say, for me, I'm so privileged that that's who it is, but also that also comes with an identity you create for yourself, where you think, well, my brother always needs me, so it doesn't matter, I'll always be wanted, you know. So when I would go home and spend any length of time, when I would leave, my brother would start putting me called the petit lip on, right, and he'd get upset because he wouldn't want you to go and stuff like that. No, he goes like that. I go, Al, do you miss me? No. I go, Al, who's your best mate? And he starts going, fucking Jerry, Debbie. Who do you love the most? Mum, Dad. Who next? Then his bird. Who next? Then you and Lauren Tack. You know, do you know what I mean? So we're actually quite needy with him, because we all want him to. So like, that's something that is difficult. Like the day that my mum said that they'd found a flat for Alexander to potentially live in, I was in the car park at Bid TV at the time, and I remember like, well, he's just going to live with me and that's that. I'll just come home. And you know what I mean? Because I remember crying, I'm like, fuck, I don't want him to live on his own. I want him to live his own life, but I don't want it, you know what I mean? So it's just bringing all those, trying to reconcile those things, and as time changes and as you get older, it's... Yeah.
You've almost been on a search for your own identity, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another podcast. 100%, yeah. I think when I'm 38, about 2-3 years ago, I kind of suppose I was working all the time. We went off the rails a wee bit, just out all the time, partying and stuff like that, because I'd never really done anything for myself, if that makes sense. And I don't want that to sound like I was ever held, because I wasn't ever held back or anything, just circumstances. You know, everything we used to always think about my brother. I remember like the first night I went to stay with my girl, I was 24, you know, for the time I had a girlfriend, and I went to stay with her for the first time, like, been scared to tell my mum, because, and then like, I've been out for the day, you know, the next day, and she'd be phoning me, she's like, James, where are you? I mean, listen, you need to come up the road. I mean, Alexander's just sitting on his own. Like, she wasn't meaning like that, you know, nobody meant any of these. It wasn't a conscious thing. It was just
the way life was.
It was just the way life was, because we hadn't known anything else. So you're totally right. You know, you make things your identity, whether you're the guy that played basketball at school, you're the guy that was good at games, you was the guy. I suppose I made my brother my identity for a long, long time. And because creating your own identity is scary. So there's also a comfort blanket, and I'll just be looking after my brother. And it kind of, for me, I'm revealing a lot of personal stuff, but like, I don't know if I want to have kids. And I don't think my girlfriend really wants, she's of the same mind to me. I don't want to speak for her, but she's kind of the same. It's not really something that I'm inclined either way, you know. I'm quite happy how my life is now, with the dog and all that, because I'm not ready to have my brother not be my number one priority, if that makes sense. Just because, and like, we'll all be there for him anyway, and my sister's got a daughter, and I'm happy that with my niece, and I love her, and I'm happy with life like that. And if I could just be around to make sure that the people I care about the most are okay, I will be a happy man. And that's what I want. I don't ever want my brother, I don't want to have someone that has to be my priority.
There's nothing.
That's not my brother, if that makes sense. Because I know we're running out of time, but you do also think about your own mortality a lot, and things like that. And my parents are in their 70s, so there's a whole world of things that you, as a sibling, you think about, that you maybe prepare yourself for mentally, or you try to prepare yourself mentally for every day. There's things that I think about, and you know, these are things when you meet someone, you've got to say, look, you know, just so you know, by the way, if we ever get married, we need to get married here because my brother needs to be there. Or look, I can't just go to Australia or New Zealand or America because You know,
Yeah.
I think now I'm in a much better place where I think where Alexander's got a much more independent care structure. He lives around the corner, but we can still go and see him every day. So these are all the things now that you think about, and I'm happy with that. I'm really am happy with that. I wouldn't want it to be any other way. But these are all the sort of things that maybe affect another life. So for me personally, you're totally right. Getting your own identity is important, but also, like for me, I want to make sure that, you know, my brother's always okay and looked after, which I'm sure he will be.
Well, being able to self-reflect like that and look at yourself and look at what, you know, what is it that I'm struggling with, and what is it that, how am I seeing this, is one of the most difficult things. And I think you're obviously doing that really well, and you seem like you're at a point now where everything you've experienced, you relayed it all in a way that really will connect with a lot of people. And I think that if you keep doing it and you keep looking at what you can, how you can impact it in a big way, you can have that big impact. And I'm really excited to see how things go for you.
Well, I definitely, I think one of the things, I always think if you try and hold yourself to account or create a bit of accountability, then we might force ourselves to do something a bit more. I would like to do something, whether we put on, I'm involved in comedy, or I'm trying to make my way in the comedy world. I don't have a disability. Maybe I could use you and my brother's disability to get myself up the ladder. There'd be people like, oh, that's terrible. But I would love to do something like, if it was to put on a gig where we could create money for charity. You did the Celtic Foundation, whether it be Cerebral Palsy Scotland, whether it be make it inclusive. Because one of the things I saw a comedian guy called Ray Bradshaw, really good comedian, and his parents were deaf.
All right, really?
And he is hilarious. He talks about, you know, having to be on the phone to the banks and creating mortgages. You know, a 12-year-old with a mortgage, he would, you know, because he would have to do these things and telling his, you know, I'll not give his set away, but when I saw him, I thought, right, that's how you do it. There's a warmth of what he's discussing there, and that's probably when I decided that, you know, to sort of integrate, you know, my experiences and try and use them as, you know, as a form of sort of humour and comedy, but also I would really like now to use that as a platform to try and create awareness. So if you want to get involved, if we could do something,
Definitely.
I would love to do that. And you know, thanks very much for having me on. I'm sorry you didn't have 4.5 hours to fill chapter 1 of everything I'd like to talk about, but I'm sure if you want to have me back, I would be delighted to. And you know, I really thanks very much for having me.
We'd definitely have you back, mate. And I think that what you said there, we can definitely do. There's a bunch of things we can do, and that's the beauty of this, is when you're seeing me from people shedding stuff, and we're able to connect and we're able to have this chat about experiences. That's the kind of thing that makes a real difference. And now, from what you're saying, we can. There's a bunch of great things we can do together. So I'm sure this won't be the last time I see you.
Top man, definitely won't be.
Thank you for coming on. It was brilliant.
Cheers, mate. Brilliant. Appreciate it. I seen you doing that with hearts since I thought I'll do it, right?
Hi, cool.